On the broadcast tonight, the crackdown in Cairo. There's been new violence, but there's also been a new campaign of intimidation in Egypt, cracking down on journalists. We'll update you on all of it tonight, including the 76-year-old American woman trapped in her apartment on the square and defending herself. Nightly News begins now.
Rage and revolution. The Middle East in crisis. This is a special edition of NBC Nightly News with Brian Williams.
And good evening tonight from Amman, Jordan, where a protest is planned for tomorrow, just like in Syria, just like in Cairo, where the violence went on again today and the situation continued to descend into chaos in that square. But we just couldn't see as much of it. We were able to get these images of the fighting there today. Journalists are among those now being attacked. This started yesterday and it's getting worse. It's an effort whipped up in part by the Egyptian government. Quickly tonight, we have some of the numbers. The State Department says they've now evacuated over 2,000 Americans. The toll from this violence said to be 10 dead, at least 800 wounded, but we believe those are conservative numbers, likely to go higher. And Egypt's President Mubarak said in an interview today, if he resigns now, there would be chaos. Members of our team remain in place tonight. Richard Engel and Lester Holt, they've been forced off the streets because some in the crowd are now searching out media and cameras to shut them down. So we're doing this with low light level and minimum production touches. And Richard, start off our reporting with what happened there today.
Good evening, Brian. The demonstrators are still in Tahrir Square tonight. All day we've been watching them hunkered down, preparing their defenses ahead of a major demonstration and possible clashes tomorrow.
Downtown Cairo was again a battleground today. Tahrir Square has become a primitive, fortified camp for demonstrators demanding that President Mubarak resign. The demonstrators hide behind a phalanx of metal shields to throw rocks at Mubarak's supporters, who attack the protesters from the edges of the square. It's a bizarre scene, with protesters defending the square with Molotov cocktails and even firebombs, like a medieval castle under siege. Last night, the protesters had to fight hard to hold the square, fending off hundreds of Molotov cocktails and gunfire. Several protesters were killed. For the army, the gunfire was too much. A tank rolled between the two sides, laying down a smokescreen to protect the demonstrators. Today, the army sent more soldiers to stand between competing demonstrations, acting as human shields. The troops did reduce the violence significantly, giving protesters time to treat the injured in makeshift infirmaries.
Hosni Mubarak wants to kill all Egyptians.
Witnesses say there are hundreds of injured in the square, bruises, broken bones, burns.
They shot us directly.
The protesters accused President Mubarak of starting yesterday's fight by sending goon squads to attack unarmed demonstrators. Today, Mubarak and his vice president both denied that. And Mubarak claimed in an interview with ABC News that he is relieved not to be running again, but said, if I resign today, there will be chaos.
And today, Brian, there was a different kind of crackdown, this one against journalists in this country. Dozens have been harassed, beaten, and detained by both the secret police and Mubarak supporters. The thinking is the government here does not want cameras watching as that protest unfolds tomorrow. Brian?
Richard, I actually heard a government official interviewed on media today telling the people of Egypt that it's these media, especially foreign media sources, that are fomenting some of this. This is going to make it very difficult to get this story out.
It seems clear that the government is once again sending a message to its people that foreign journalists, the Muslim Brotherhood, and big business are somehow involved in a major conspiracy to incite violence in this country. That message was put on national television today by the vice president. He accused foreign journalists of trying to bring this country to its knees. And clearly, people in the secret police and Mubarak's supporters took that message seriously and were hunting down reporters all day today.
All right, Richard, I want to take us both back to something that happened really seemingly just a few hours ago. Last night in Cairo, the thunder of heavy automatic weapons rocked the downtown area, as did the sound of crashing metal, breaking glass, flashbang grenades, and warriors in the crowd. There were fires burning, hundreds of Molotov cocktails, and burning cars. We started describing the action when the shooting started. Then I later joined Richard Engel in a safe location above the fighting, much of which was carried live on MSNBC last night for hours on end. We're on a building overlooking the square. Live gunfire going on.
It's developing just sort of right below us right now, so it's difficult to figure out what is happening. You just saw someone hit by a Molotov cocktail who's trying to put himself out. So they are no longer contained. This is what you could describe as running street battles.
That's small arms, but it's close to our location, what we're hearing now. That the big, throaty, cacophonous blast, sometimes in bursts of 3, sometimes 6 shots, is from the APC mounted 50 caliber.
That tank is once again on the move, ejecting this smoke screen as it goes, and it did have an impact. It did allow some people to escape. Emotions are clearly very high. What they do with the smoke screen is to allow people to leave under cover. So if the idea was to allow the supporters of President Mubarak to leave without being lynched by the protesters, then this move appears to have been successful.
Oh, there's no question the population in front of us has dropped, but there are still all these souls standing in this face-off. They're swarming a pickup truck down here. They've set a car on fire on the overpass where the tank was. It's Mad Max.
We have seen the disorganized retreat under cover fire from the army of the protesters, and now we're in a very dangerous time as no one really knows who's in charge. The protesters are looking for people. They found this driver. Who knows who this driver is? This driver may not be a government supporter at all. He may just be someone who got caught up in this mess. They are angry, and this is a very uncertain time.
This is pretty extraordinary. This is the kind of heavy caliber automatic weapons fire Richard became inured to after 6-7 years in Baghdad. We've both heard it in Afghanistan. You don't expect it in Cairo. Here's a tracer going with desperation fighting now. In some cases, 20 feet separate these two sides. The sun can't come up fast enough for Cairo.
Our description from what we assumed to be a safe perch turned out it was above that automatic weapons fire and the fighting in the streets last night. And now we want to go back to Cairo and over to Lester Holt, who today picked up on a story we first reported on in Cairo last night, and we received a ton of email about it back in New York today. It's about the 76-year-old American woman, a great-grandmother named Mary Thornberry, who retired, moved to Cairo years ago to study Egyptian history. Then she got trapped in her apartment on the square and was forced to defend herself inside her own apartment. And Lester, what did you learn about her and her story today?
Brian, it's a remarkable story. A lot of our viewers have followed it. We have been in contact with her throughout the day to find out how she is doing. For those of us who are here by choice, it's difficult enough being on the sidelines of this conflict, but imagine in her case where she's simply a victim of circumstances.
76-year-old American retiree Mary Thornberry is facing another night trapped in her apartment, facing an even worse situation.
I found out I'd no longer have water.
Today, her son, who from back home in the U.S. first alerted us to her plight, says fast-moving events simply outpace his elderly mom's ability to act in time.
The problem is the buses aren't running. She can't get a taxi. She can't walk her way through the mobs.
This morning, we made arrangements to meet Mary face-to-face, and if it was safe, we would offer to escort her out. She was nervous about another night under siege.
Sometimes I just hear the huge sound. Sometimes the chant would be Mubarak, Mubarak, Mubarak. Sometimes it'll be El Verde, El Verde, El Verde.
But by the light of day, it was clear the challenge of reaching her apartment, though just a quarter of a mile away, was exponentially higher. We decided to test the waters anyway, venturing out onto streets that hours earlier had been the scene of ferocious battles.
You can just see over here now the smoke, and that's the area where we think Mary's apartment is.
They're fighting right there. He's saying don't go any further.
And just minutes later, we witnessed this. I broke the news to Mary over the phone.
We can't put you or our folks at risk at this point.
Oh, heavens no.
After we featured her story on Today this morning, the U.S. Embassy contacted us to ask how to reach Mary and are trying to find a way to help her. Back in Washington today, a State Department spokesman responded to a question about her situation.
Where we can be helpful, we of course will dispatch directly assistance, or we'll try to work with the host government where we can to help them.
Tonight there is more fighting in Mary's neighborhood. She says her spirits are down, but her ire is clearly still up.
I'm really getting quite angry, and it's just as well that no one comes and sticks their face in my broken glass, because I'm apt to whop them with my rolling pin.
And she can almost tell who has the upper hand in the square at any given time based on the chants she hears. Brian, she says she's got plenty of food and all the other things and bottled water, so she's fine for now. The good news is, at this hour, it's rather quiet here. We haven't heard any gunfire for some time.
Wouldn't want to go up against Mary, Lester, but as you point out, the good news is a lot of people are trying to help, including yourself, so thanks for that. Thanks to Lester Holt and Richard Engel for their reporting, starting us off here tonight. All of this raises the question as this crisis wears on, and Mubarak is clearly not listening to the U.S. suggestion, which is getting stronger every day, that he step down now. What else can the United States do? Our chief foreign affairs correspondent, Andrea Mitchell, in Washington tonight with some new reporting on that front. Andrea, good evening.
Good evening, Brian. Well, there is growing concern about more violence tomorrow, as you know. And officials say that President Obama wants to flood the zone, increase international pressure on Mubarak. Vice President Biden has now called Egypt's Vice President Suleiman, urging restraint. Other world leaders calling Mubarak include Russia's Dmitry Medvedev and Germany's Angela Merkel. U.S. officials believe that Egypt's military holds the key to persuading Mubarak to give up power. What would come next? Experts have told the administration the Muslim Brotherhood has to be part of any political coalition, and that the United States should even reach out to them now. The administration says it will not, even though some elements in the Brotherhood have pledged to preserve the peace treaty with Israel. The big fear is that continued chaos would open the door to al-Qaeda, which had its roots in Egypt. And there are reports that Egypt's army has increased its patrols along its borders. Also today, at an Intelligence Committee hearing, an intelligence official testified that the White House had been warned late last year of instability in Egypt, but couldn't pinpoint what trigger might topple the regime, Brian.
All new territory for everyone involved. Andrea Mitchell in our D.C. newsroom. Andrea, thanks. And again, we're here in Amman, where because of this wave, this spark of uprising in the air here in the Middle East, the feeling starting in Tunisia, spreading across the region, that we may be on the brink of some sort of big change. The king here in Jordan suddenly decided this week to change his government before even the suggestion of it was forced on him. Our own Martin Fletcher is here with us. He's a veteran of the Middle East, but Martin, I think it's fair to say none of us have any experience in what we're seeing happen right now.
Absolutely, Brian. This is new territory for everybody, including the King of Jordan, of course. And today, the King and the Prime Minister of Jordan met with the leaders of the Muslim Brotherhood for the first time in a decade. The first official meeting in 10 years, another sign they're hoping to avoid Egypt's meltdown.
The call is spreading down with the regime. More demonstrations in Yemen today, tens of thousands in several cities, calling on their president to leave after 32 years in power. But also spreading demonstrations in his support. No clashes in Yemen so far, though. Another sign more Arab governments are getting the message. In Algeria, the government today promised it would end its 19-year state of emergency, quote, soon. And in Gaza today, more peaceful support for Egypt's anti-government movement, with protests against their own government planned this weekend in Syria, encouraged on Facebook. 13,000 people like a page called The Syrian Revolution. Jordan's calls for political change at home have also been quiet, but determined.
The myth of the strength of the regime has disappeared, and that has given people the courage to speak again.
Everywhere the same call for political change, more jobs, cheaper food. Tamir Korma showed us around a poor neighborhood in Jordan's capital. Almost none of the men here are working, he says, and there's no unemployment money, no medical insurance, no future pension. The poor are on their own. Tamir is 34 and unmarried. He says he can't afford it.
You have to be careful in your dreams. You can't go so high.
As President Mubarak said this week, within 10 years, 100 million young Arab men and women will be unemployed. And they're already serving notice on their governments across the region. They won't take it lying down anymore.
Poor people here have wanted these things for decades, Brian. Jobs, food, dignity. But what's new is now they're daring to say it out loud. And in this part of the world, Brian, that's a huge thing.
Well, as you said to me before the broadcast, old friend, we may be back here a lot in the weeks and months to come. Martin Fletcher, thanks as always.